Right, Peter Cowley. I've been a tomato winemaker for 25 years, although I'm a senior winemaker now and there are other people helping me out. When you get a bit senior you get very opinionated, and you're going to see some of these opinions come out. I've got quite strong views on Hawke's Bay now and the strengths of Hawke's Bay, and I won't tell you about the weaknesses, but yeah, it's a great wine area. I like to get people in Hawke's Bay over the summer because it just dries out. By Christmas the hills are going brown, and then into January they go white, and you know, it just looks like a wine area, feels like a wine area. You know, the green vines, rows and rows of green vines, and just the white ground, burned off grass, and yeah. I think for Australians, they probably struggle to understand that without visiting. They picture the whole of New Zealand as being somewhere south of Tassie. Hawke's Bay, in fact, has the longitude line that goes through Hawke's Bay, ends up in Melbourne, and without labouring over this one, you know, in Australia you can get the winds from the centre of Australia, which will give you 40-degree days. We don't get those, but our summer temperatures hover around the high 20s, low 30s, which is all you need to ripen Cabernet and Syrah. And our rainfall is low for New Zealand, one of the lowest spots, because there's a mountain range up the middle of both islands, and all the wet weather comes from the west, so it gets dropped as it comes over, and as the wind comes over and then drops down into the east of the islands, both islands, it warms up. It's just they call it orographical, well, rainfall, the loss of rainfall on the other side is an orographical feature, but so we're warm and dry, and yeah, it's a great place to grow wine styles that we do. So we don't do Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, obviously. There is some Sauvignon Blanc planted, but generally it's not a big part of what people do in Hawke's Bay. And there's very little Pinot Noir planted in Hawke's Bay. The Pinot guys would tell us it's too hot, and that's just fine. We're happy making the styles that we do. So just briefly with the styles of wine that we do make in Hawke's Bay, Chardonnay's the big variety for whites, and although there is one other region that claims to be New Zealand's Chardonnay region, we actually have more Chardonnay, and I think we make terrific wine. Lovely fruit-focused, peachy, nectarine sort of fruit with citrus overtones, and nice concentration, which is the basis for the winemaking. Influences of barrel fermentation and lees stirring and Malo and all that stuff that people do. So a magazine tasting where you know, you'll be looking at a lineup of Hawke's Bay Chardonnays, I always find it a delight. It's really strong class in a magazine tasting or in a wine show. As I say, there is some Sauvignon, a little bit of Viognier these days, and then into the reds. The biggest variety by far is Merlot, closely followed by Cabernet, and then probably Syrah, but the Merlot and Cabernet totally dominates the red production in Hawke's Bay, always has done. It's what we do. That style in Australia and New Zealand, in fact in the world, is not so much out of fashion, but not quite as sexy as it has been. You know, Bordeaux was sort of a massive wine phenomenon for many years. Still is, of course. It's the biggest wine event. That en premier release of the new Bordeaux Reds is the biggest exchange of money that goes on in the wine game by a long shot. And people understand those wine styles, they're blends of Cabernet and Merlot, or Merlot and Cabernet and so on, and that's what we do in Hawke's Bay for the same reasons that they do. Temperate maritime climate, so the varieties ripen nicely, they don't over-ripen, and if you've got a good vineyard and a half-decent year, you don't under-ripen them. And they bring that blending process, which I hate talking about it. It always sounds like winemakers in offices, you know, sort of adding things and cheating or something. But it brings the best. You know, you perfectly ripen Cabernet and Merlot and Cabernet Franc and maybe Petit Verdot, and the best features of those nicely ripe wines can then be used in various proportions to make a consistent medium plus bodied wine with delightful fruit, great tannins, and you can allow in our type of climate for a slight variation in the type of year. I think in Australia it's probably fairly true to say that that one year is pretty much the same as the next as a rule, and that's great. You need plenty of heat to ripen reds. When we tell the story, we would say that maybe there's some excessive heat in some years in some areas in Australia that influence the wine styles, sort of moving them into quite very heavy-bodied and higher alcohol wines. Now, a lot of people like that. That's fine. We do something that's just pulled back a bit, less heavy-bodied, unashamedly mid-bodied, and very drinkable wine. So alcohols of 13 to 14 are typical. And the fruit flavours, I think, are a particular feature of Hawke's Bay Cab Merlots or Merlot Cabernets. Just delightful blackberry, red and dark cherry, raspberry. Was hesitant to go on about this too much. It sounds like we're using fruit as well, but there's just quite a definable, fresh, vibrant fruit character rather than excessive heat moving the flavours off into slightly raisiny or porty flavours. They're really quite delightful in the aromas and in the fruit flavours when it goes into the mouth. Nice fruit sweetness and without the sort of overbearingly heavy, ripe sweetness you can get. And then the tannins in the wines, I think, are another particular feature of Hawke's Bay wines. Tannins in Bordeaux are something that people talk about. The astringency, the Brits always go on about freshness, refreshing character in the tannins. You know, as long as you've got good concentration of fruit sweetness, a refreshing, fine, ripe tannin running through the wine is just a real pleasure. It's actually another feature of the wine. It's delicious, and if you like your red wines, you come to really appreciate it. I remember when I first saw Italian wines about 20, 25, 30, I don't know, 30 years ago, I suppose, just huge dry tannins, and I just wondered what I'd struck. And now I know, although they've toned it back a little bit, I've come to really appreciate those tannins. And certain climates emphasise them. Certain grape varieties in certain climates. I mean, obviously, northern Italy and Tuscany, it's Sangiovese, but there's a fleshiness and that fine, dry tannin, which I can see in Bordeaux-style wines, and in the wines of Hawke's Bay. Put together as a package with that sweet fruit, nice, focused, fresh berry character, and those fine, dry tannins. They're terrific wines, and you can drink them relatively early, and because of the tannin content and so on, and the freshness, they age forever. A lot of our wines are still delightful at 10 or 15 and 20 years in the cellar.